There's nothing I like better than to be surprised by a movie when I go out to the theater and get way more than I expected, and that is absolutely the case with Fly Me to the Moon. This is the new movie directed by Greg Berlanti, and it stars Channing Tatum and Scarlett Johansson as a pair of mismatched people that fall in love. Let's, it's a romantic comedy. You can tell that from all the trailers.
Miss, you're on fire.
Very original. No, I do not want to stop, drop, and roll with you.
No, your book is on fire.
But the whole conceit with this idea is that it's based around the Apollo missions and NASA, as the organization was on a true moonshot, trying to get to the moon and put people on the moon in a race against the Russians at the behest of President Kennedy, who passed away before he could see his dream realized. But he really impressed upon NASA and Americans to invest in the idea that they had to put human beings on the moon. And so that's a really interesting backdrop. I'm a huge fan of movies like The Right Stuff, and just the story of the bravery and the unbelievable confidence and just the wherewithal and the intelligence and the ability to solve the problems with really primitive technology to get people into space and land them safely on the moon and bring them back. Just mind-blowing. So if you're going to set a story in that time frame, I'm interested. I'm also a big fan of the era in terms of its music, and they have lots of great 60s soul in here. There's a lot of Sam Cooke, which I really dug. I love the costumes and the era-appropriate vehicles and all the storefronts and all the backdrops. Everything is just really, really well done all the way through, and I enjoyed all of that. And I have to say also that I really enjoyed the performances throughout this movie, not just with Johansson and Tatum, but also Ray Romano has got a great supporting role in this. He has really blown me away as somebody that's come from the sitcom stage and just popped up in a bunch of different movies in lots of interesting ways. And it's hard not to feel empathy for Romano's characters, because he always looks like he's gone through a lot, and he definitely has been going through a lot, working beside Tatum to try to get these astronauts safely to the moon and back. And just the idea of that is just really cool. And of course, populated throughout the ranks at NASA are all these young men, mostly men, that are trying to figure out, and they're all engineers, and they keep popping up in these little scenes where they're performing tests and there are explosions and fires happening, and it's just really freaking cool. So the setup is great, but the twist on everything is that Johansson is playing an advertising executive from New York City, and she gets recruited to fake the moon landing just in case the real thing doesn't work. And so it is a really interesting idea, and I was a little freaked out by it because, of course, I'm not a big fan of the conspiracy theorists out there that really get behind the idea that the moon landing was fake and that astronauts didn't really go out there and that they didn't really accomplish what they accomplished. It's titillating and it's fascinating to get into commentary on that, and of course I've watched some YouTube videos about that, but I just think it's really kind of awful to sort of undermine all of those efforts from all of those remarkable people, all those scientists and engineers and problem solvers that figured it out, and we're just sort of throwing that under the bus and saying, no, it was all filmed on a soundstage. Well, that's what this movie proposes, and it's really effective, and it's a great kind of recreation of how they actually could do it, and it's all under this really flamboyant director played by Jim Rash, who steals every scene he's in. He's hilarious. He is so antithetical to the era and to everybody else's attitude and the sort of stiffness and the top secret kind of qualities that we see presented on screen. And so there was a lot for me to laugh with and to be engaged by and to be surprised by. I was really invested in each of these different characters' motivations and their reasons for appearing on screen. Woody Harrelson is also terrific in this movie as well. It was just incredibly entertaining, and I was expecting it to be just super light and kind of throw away and kind of make me a little pissed off that they leaned into this conspiracy theory a little too much, but everything is handled with such a deft touch. And so I have to give kudos to Greg Berlanti and his story team. They really put this together. Like, it really holds together. I think this is one of those movies that you're going to be able to see at different times in your life and appreciate it, and just respect the craft here. Everybody worked really hard to put a really solid story together.
I'm here for the casting. Lucy!
You're a juicy part.
60 missions in Korea. I flew 52 missions in Korea. I flew 52 missions in Korea. How's that? What?
And I think, honestly, the biggest surprise for me is just how wonderful Scarlett Johansson is in this performance. She's got the most weight to carry in the film because we see her character go through a pretty big arc here. And she's really compelling and really fun, and she plays with these different character types because she's always kind of selling things. That's her whole characterization. And she's so believable. She's so solid with it and convincing and also charming. And you can see the armor that Channing Tatum's character, who's a much more straight-laced NASA leader, you see it being chipped away as he starts to fall in love with this character, and I thought that was all really good. Listen, I was very entertained by this movie. I think it's great. There are a couple of slower stretches, and it's a little long, maybe. It's a little bit lengthy for romantic comedy, but the setup and its story elements and this period setting, this fascinating period in time, and they honor all of these space missions really well. There's some really cool visual effects of rockets taking off, and we're seeing things from different vantage points. We get into the cockpit with the astronauts. We actually see some of the moon landing, and honestly, I was moved by that. I actually was like, wow, this is really a great celebration of that time where the whole world kind of got together and we're watching in front of screens as this impossible was made possible. And I think you can kind of describe that about this movie, which looks, on its surface as kind of like this cheesy throwaway thing, but it's really not. Fly Me to the Moon is actually really great. And the cool thing is, it reminded me a lot of like 1960s Walt Disney comedies, because it doesn't ever get too, I guess it stays in its period, right? It doesn't get too obnoxious or rowdy. There isn't like this presentation of the era and then behind it is just all of this cynicism and nastiness. It's kind of candy-coated all the way through, which is maybe a little bit of a fallacy because that isn't real life, but it does make for a shiny, fun time at the movies. And I actually took my daughter, to see this, and even though it's rated PG-13, she still had a really good time with this movie. She said she'd give it an 8, and I had to walk her to camp today, so she didn't have time to record anything for this review, but she really enjoyed it, and she'd give it an 8. I'm right about there as well. I would say it's between an 8 and 8.5. I'm going to give it an 8.5.